What? I want you on my lap. I want you. I want you here with me. Okay, here we go. Going live. Going live. Henry's here. Hello, hello. Welcome on in, everybody. Henry, I see your request. Perfect. I'm going to. Okay. What, Bella? You see, lady? All
Hi,
right, we did
Lex.
it. We
Yeah,
did it.
you know what? This is the first time I do this. So I just want to know that your audience should know that even though I'm a little older and I can't manage the technology all that well, I figured this out.
We did. We figured it out.
Thanks for the
Yes.
help. How
Yeah,
are
of
you?
course. I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. Like working from home, quarantine like everybody else. Just respecting the stay-at-home orders. It's been tough,
Yeah.
but we got to do it. We got to do it.
Yeah, I hear that. I actually since being at home, I cut my own hair. So
Yeah,
we're
it
working
looks
on some
good.
things.
It looks good.
Step one is done. We got the sides down.
I am not gonna be that courageous, which is why I'm wearing the
The
baseball cap.
hat.
Because if I took that off, like this is the longest I've gone in my entire life without a
Mm-hmm.
haircut.
Oh wait,
So I'm
ready for
just
this?
keeping it all here.
Wait, ready?
It looks good. You should leave it like that. It's like a whole new look. You know?
It's literally a mohawk or like its own set of bangs. So
Yeah, hey, you can do a
so
lot with
we're
that.
working through
You can do a
it.
lot with that. I love it. Loving it. No, but listen,
Yeah,
I'm really excited. I'm so happy that you and I connected on this because I think it's a great idea. I
I
really
totally
have a
agree.
lot of questions. And I don't know how you want to tee this up. I know you sent something out yesterday. I did to my audience as well, but I just think it's really important we talk about this stuff.
I completely agree. I think to start us off, we should talk about like how we came up with the idea in the first place
I
because it
agree.
was just such a natural kind of, there's this missing gap of information.
I
Um,
agree. I agree.
so for folks who don't know, Henry is the podcast host of This Happens. And I was interviewed by Henry for the podcast to talk about what my personal experience as non-binary, queer, trans-masculine human was like throughout my college years, whatever it may be. And what was one episode turned into a second, which turned into a third. And there was
Yes.
just so much that we were talking about, and there was so much more that we wanted to talk about.
Yeah, we left a lot uncovered. And you know what? When I think about that journey, that was a while ago. I don't know if you remember the first time we connected. That would have been the fall of 18. Okay. In
Yeah.
the fall of 18, because my daughter, who knows your sister,
Yep.
from school, as she knew that I was starting the podcast. And therefore, people know, I was married to a woman, came out as gay about 11 years ago when I was 40. So later in life, so I had my own sort of experience with being a sexual minority, right? So she told me, she says, you got to talk to Lex. They're awesome. You need to speak to them on this subject. And I'm like, you know what? I'm a gay man. When I was coming out, I felt there were a lot of people that didn't know what coming out was like for me. And there was so much I wanted to share with them. And then I said to myself, when I connected with you, there's so much I don't know about transgendered people in the transgender community. I'm like, this ignorance is unacceptable. We got to like kill this. We got to like, you got to educate me, right?
Oh
So
yeah. Oh
yeah, we
yeah.
had so much fun with those episodes, but you're right. There was so much more that we left sort of untouched. And I have to say that I'm still, if I could use this term, confused about some of
Yeah.
it, which is why I think doing this ally chat is really good to like get some of this stuff out there. So anyway, I'm
Yeah.
excited.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's a perfect way to it's honestly information for all. So it's at a level where we whether you're trans and you want to know more about like the history of like the social construction of gender or gender
Yes.
expression, or if you're an ally, whether you're queer or not, right? Because you are a cisgender gay man,
Yes.
but just
Yes.
because you're gay and we're both in the LGBTQ community doesn't mean that you know what it means or what it's like to be
Yeah, we
trans
all
because
need to
of
be educated.
sexuality.
Absolutely. And I
Right.
have to say this though, I just want to shout out to like transgendered folks all over the world because the more I learn, the more I connect with you. You guys are the definition of courage. Beautiful people, being who you are. And I love it. And like, we have so much to learn from you and the struggles that you experience, like we're all in this together, and
Yes.
being an ally, whether you're queer or not, whether you're a sexual minority or not, it doesn't matter. We're all in this together. And I'm just excited. So I don't know if you want to talk about how we're going to do 4 of these, and we've kind of chopped them up into sort of different topics.
Yeah.
Does it make sense to do that now?
Yeah. So we are doing a bi-weekly live, I'm calling it like a mini web series.
Yes, I love
and
that.
through this series, it's every Thursday at 12:30 and Sunday at 2 p.m. And this is all EST. We are going to be addressing different gender topics. And so we currently have 4 episodes.
4. I got them right here.
Yeah. So Henry, please share what our 4 episodes are.
So today we want to cover identity and expression. I think that's sort of the foundation of a lot of this, right? And I have a bunch of questions on that. Then I know we've gotten some questions from some of your audience and your followers about things like pronouns and stuff like that. And we're going to get to that. So like episode 2 on Sunday, we're talking about respect and use of pronouns. And I have to say that sometimes I worry about how I feel like if I say the wrong thing, how might, my transgendered, person there feel about how I'm using that language, and we're going to cover that. We want to talk about transitioning. When you and I met, you weren't yet transitioning like in a physical way, right? And then you were thinking about that. And then we connected months later when you started that experience. So very powerful stuff there. And then the last one we wanted to do as part of this series was talking about inclusion. Like, how do people make sure that transgendered people feel included in terms of language, space, at work, at home, common areas, whatever, right?
Exactly.
So those are the 4 topics. That's a lot.
Yeah.
And you know what? Maybe we're gonna need more. Who knows? But at least
I'm thinking we can take it all the way.
Yes.
So those are our first 4 episodes, and we are going to just be addressing the audience or the community's questions, your questions, and we want it to be informal, conversational. And although there is just an innate fear, regardless of who you're talking to or when it is, that you are going to upset or potentially harm someone because of what you're saying, I am here to just explicitly note that what is said or the questions that are asked or the ways that we are engaging, I'm coming at it from a completely, like, we are here to learn together. So you can say whatever you want to say without without the fear of offending me, because I can say, well, maybe we should address it this way. Speaking of which, I have the first thing I am going to say. I believe, and it may just be my headphones, but I believe I heard you say transgendered people. Is that correct?
Yes. Is
okay.
That wrong?
So,
I'm screwing up already.
No, but that's why we're having these combos. So I'm unsure. I believe that sometimes in journals they'll use that term. However, I personally, and this is a personal thing, I may be alone in this, but I personally am uncomfortable when people say transgendered, because it is in the past. Well, for one, it's in the past tense. And the trans experience is like a daily lived experience.
Gotcha.
And then it also, to me, it implies transgendered implies some form of decision to be trans. And the aspect
you
of
chose some kind of transformation. Gotcha.
Right. Whereas
just there's no choice to be a gay man or something like that.
Right.
Good
right.
point.
So I say
Thank
trans people, trans community, humans. Yeah, that's the type of language that I use.
All right, thank you. Well, this is exactly what this is about. So listen, I have my first question on this, okay? Because this is one that still confuses me a bit, and it has to do with the idea of sex versus gender.
Mm-hmm.
Because we use sex, we throw that term around, male, female, whatever, right? And then there's this whole idea of gender. Can you kind of tell me what the difference between the two is?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually going to add a third. So we have gender identity, we have gender expression, and then we have sex assigned at birth.
Okay.
And so I typically address all 3 together, and a beautiful graphic that I use all the time to describe the differences between these different senses of ourself is actually called the genderbread person.
Okay.
And so I actually have our episode up on my website, and I have all the resources, including that image, so that folks can go and look at it if they so choose. And so the way we look at it is, if I am the genderbread person, we have the mind, and the mind is where gender identity is.
Okay.
We have the genderbread person, yet
Yeah.
again. Then you have the DNA, internal and external reproductive organs, hormones, chromosomes, you name it.
So is that like the biology of it all?
Right.
Biology.
And that
Okay.
is the sex assigned at birth.
Okay.
And then
so
you
that's
have,
like on your birth certificate, it might say male or female. That's what you're talking about there.
yes,
Sort of
and
that
I'm gonna,
biological thing. Okay.
yeah,
All right.
and I'll break it down even further. I'm just trying to get like the visuals in because I know I'm a visual learner.
Yeah, I love
So we
that.
have like, we have genderbread human. The mind is for gender identity,
Okay.
and then the sex assigned at birth is like a little chromosome, and then you have gender expression, which is what the genderbread human person is wearing. And so the
Gotcha.
difference between all of them are that gender identity is someone's internal sense of self. So it can only come from within. So that means that no one that is outside of the person knows what someone's gender identity is unless that person has decided to share that with someone else.
Only they know, and that's something that gotcha.
Exactly.
So it's innate in them, in their identity. That's why you called it identity, which has to do with sort of a mind,
Exactly.
not a mindset. It's exactly what that person feels they are.
Right. It's that internal sense of self.
Okay.
And the terms that we use for gender identity are gender terms. So that would be man, woman, non-binary, trans feminine, agender, whatever gender terms like.
But I noticed you didn't say masculine or feminine.
I did not.
That's okay. We're gonna get to that. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I'm guessing that's more like expression territory, right? Okay.
It is. So we just talked about the gender identity being someone's internal sense of self, and we use those gender terms. So for you, you would say that you identify as a man, and for me, I would say I identify as non-binary transmasculine.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have gender expression. So gender expression is the external or the physical presentation of someone that is masculine, feminine, and or androgynous.
Wow. So the expression can vary greatly. I would imagine so expression is like a social construct. It's a cultural thing. You can travel all over the world and it can be incredibly fluid what it means to be masculine or feminine, right?
Exactly. And in the same way, gender identity, right, identifying as a man, woman, non-binary, that is also a social construct because depending on where you are in the world, whether you're in a different country or in a different culture, there are different definitions and understandings of gender. So for instance, Native American culture, they understand that there are 5 genders, and that's because they believe in two-spirit people, which are folks who have the spirit of both a man and a woman, which is in our terms, we would understand that as transgender. However, it doesn't actually, it doesn't, correlate exactly, but that helps folks to understand. Or in India, there are Hijra, which are what we would also identify in our culture as transgender folks, but they have men, women, and Hijra. And so there are so many different cultures and societies, and for the history of time, there are records of having more than one gender, and then also having more than one, that there is more than 2 sexes, right? So we know that we just talked about gender identity in the mind, gender expression, how someone chooses to present as masculine, feminine, and or androgynous, and then you have sex. So sex, when we talk about sex, we are talking about someone's sex assigned at birth, which means it is a combination of sex characteristics that include chromosomes, hormones, internal and external reproductive organs, and like you were saying, the biology of the person.
So when I listen to you and I see some of the questions and the comments that people are shooting at us here, very interesting. For example, the bit about sex. That's not, if I could use this term, black and white either, because if you think about nature and how beautiful and bountiful nature is, right? If you look at, we're animals, right? Just like, we just happen to be self-aware, but there's so much variety. So I just noticed one of the comments, right? That people are like, well, sex is not necessarily binary either, right? It can represent a range as well.
Exactly, because for the span of since there were humans, there have always been more than 2 genders, more than 2 sexes, more than 2 ways of expressing and presenting that, those identities. And so although most commonly we hear folks use the binary terms for sex, male and female, we also need to be aware and conscious that it's actually male, female, and intersex. And that intersex as a category is not just one sex identity as female and male are. Intersex is actually an umbrella term that is used to encompass folks who have a mix of male and female sex characteristics. And that can look thousands of different ways. And that's why it's an umbrella term.
No, I mean, I think it's fascinating. And I love whoever came up with this gender bread thing is brilliant, because I'm getting it even more clearly than when we've originally talked. Because I walked away with some conversations with you where at the moment it was pretty clear, but then later kind of faded away. I'm like, I started getting confused again. So a couple of things, right? Get the identity. It's here, right? We just learned that the sex itself, that can also be, there's a range of that as well, particularly with this idea of intersex. When you hear people talk about, and I saw a comment on the screen here about gender roles, what about that? Because that to me goes again to expression, right? So like, is that part of how, so give me an example, like you yourself, tell me again how you identify and then how you express yourself. Use you as an example to tell me how you fit into these categories, if you will.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. So starting with gender identity, right, in our mind. So I identify as a non-binary transmasculine person. And so those are the
non-binary transmasculine. Okay.
Right. So those are the gender terms I use. And I personally feel at home when I say non-binary, because I do not identify within the gender binary, which in our society is women and men. And because I don't identify in that binary, the non-binary is the term that I use.
Okay.
But then more specifically, I feel an attachment to the identity term transmasculine, because I identify really strongly with my masculinity and also with my femininity. But as someone who was assigned female at birth, I am, as society dictates, allowed to be feminine or allowed to partake in like feminine activities. But because I wasn't assigned male at birth, which society has associated with masculine things, because I currently identify with masculinity in addition to my femininity, that's that transmasculine aspect.
And when you say currently, does that mean that you and I could be speaking, let's say in a year, and you may no longer identify that way? Is that possible?
Yeah, it absolutely is.
Okay.
Because the way that I understand identity in general is that we're constantly gaining experiences, learning more about ourselves, and growing as individuals and in relationships with other people. And it's through all of those interactions and conscious like self processing and figuring out like what we need and what our desires are that we come to a more complete and like truthful understanding of ourselves. And so I'm not trying to fool anyone by saying that I know everything about myself, because I don't. And I don't know what experiences I'm going to have that are going to impact and influence what I see as affirming for me or discouraging.
Yeah, this is an aspect of being transgender that I find beautiful, which is like this open-mindedness to like so much, right? Like the rest of us are kind of boxed ourselves into something, and maybe that's not necessarily where we belong. Transgender people seem to be far more open and in tune with more potential and possibility.
That is a very interesting statement, and I am actually I partially agree, but I'm going to push against it a little bit. But before I do that, I wanted to identify what my gender expression is and then what my sex assigned at birth is. So we had gender identity for me, non-binary, transmasculine. Hi, Dad. My dad just joined.
Hey, Dad.
So we have that my gender identity, my internal sense of self, is that I'm a non-binary transmasculine human. And then we have my gender expression, which I would identify as, for the most part, masculine. So gender expression is referring to how someone chooses to consciously present themselves to the outside world. And that
but again, that depends where you may be in whatever culture, because how that's defined might be different and fluid. So you're sort of conforming or choosing within that context what that would mean for you, right?
Exactly.
Wherever you might be.
Yeah. So like in our culture, there was actually this, everyone knows like the pink and blue, like pink is for girls and blue is for boys. But That is actually very recent in our history. Actually, it's only the early 1900s was actually when pink was the color for boys, because it was seen as a strong, brave color, as the lighter color of red, and blue was seen as a gentle color that was associated with girls. And so it's only in the 1950s that there was a shift to pink being strongly associated, also known as like pink washing for girls, and then blue for boys, which was pushed even further in like the commercial marketing of clothing by the mass producers in like the 1970s, 1980s. But what folks don't understand is that that is also relatively recent, right? Like our social construction of what masculine is and what feminine is relatively recent, and it's all constructed by
You know
us.
what's interesting about that? Because then I was thinking as you were talking, like things like girls wear dresses, boys wear pants. And I was just reading an article about how like European royalty would dress in like the 15, 16, and 1700s. And you have like Louis the 14th, one of the most powerful monarchs in history, literally wearing a wig, wearing like tight ballet dancer looking pants and what looked like high heels.
Yeah.
And that was right. So I get your point there.
Yeah. And that's the thing is that, and on my website, I also linked 4 different articles that talk about like the pink and blue and like what the shifts have been in more recent history, and looking at like what the historical texts have said about like in Europe in whatever century, and like what the color associations, the fabric design.
It just proves the point, right? It just proves the point all over.
Right. Yeah. It just provides more support and evidence for the fact that like everything in society, we have created it, right? Like we have tables, we have headphones, we have all of these things because we decided that there was some form of a need or a desire to categorize and locate certain things. And then we came up with the words, we came up with the definitions, and then we decided to go with it. And so a lot of the work that I do on a daily basis, just like the biggest aspect, one of the largest aspects of my advocacy is this constant process of dismantling cis, het, binaries, and oppressive systems by sharing my personal experience, by looking back at historical texts, and by looking at current academic articles that talk about all of these different social constructions.
So much good stuff out there, and creating these communities is so important. And I think about when you talked about cis and hetero and the binary, like generally then when I think about those things, that's when the term sort of non-conforming in my mind comes to play, because it's like this big umbrella to say there are folks that are living a different way. They're living their truth that doesn't conform to any of that stuff that we've built. It seems like those are artificial constructs. We've made them up.
Yes. And they actually, I'm gonna have to find this and I'll add
so
it
we can
to
unmake
too.
them. We can unmake them. That's my point.
We can unmake them because we've created them. And then before I forget, because you said that, and this is absolutely true, that many trans people, because of the fact that we are not cisgender, we go through, the we is very general, so this is like on a large spectrum, and there's a lot of difference in the spectrum. But as non-cis people, trans people have the mental process of whether it's questioning or having like a back and forth conversation about like what is my internal sense of self of being a woman, non-binary, a man, or what do I feel is affirming masculinity, femininity, androgyny, one in the morning and one in the night, having
there's
this
like
constant
a constant
process.
Constant pushing and probing and
and
introspection.
And so that is certainly an aspect of trans experience that I think that the majority, if not all, trans people go through, right, in their own unique ways. However, I do want to say that that doesn't necessarily mean that trans people as a whole, like trans folks, are fluid in their gender identity, expression, or gender roles. Because I know the majority of trans masculine folks or trans men that I see on social media or have had interactions with are binary, right? So they identify as men. And because of their identification within that binary, and for growing up as, or being seen as someone who they actually weren't, they try and stick as closely as possible to our current society's understanding or kind of restrictions of this is what a man is or this is what a man does, which is extremely toxic. Mom just called. I hope she doesn't call again. If she does, I'll just say.
Oh, okay, that's what I was wondering. I was like, oh, you were on pause here for a second.
Yeah, I'm back. But so that's definitely something that I actually didn't even realize when I came out as non-binary. I was like, the trans community, I'm going to make all these connections and I'm going to learn about different identities and I'm going to be loved and supported by everyone. And I had a severe wake-up call with queer folks who were cis and then also trans folks who were mainly binary trans men.
That's a great point.
They ended up coming to my page when I had made a post about 2 years ago about the importance of raising children gender neutral or with the option of not being restricted to gender roles. And I received death threats. I was told to...
That's such I identify with that in the sense of as a gay man where, I came out later in life. I've been married to a woman. She's my best friend now. I raised 2 kids. It's got a great ending. The story does, but it was difficult. And I came out very naive thinking, oh my God, here everyone's going to embrace me and all. And then I find that within sort of the gay community amongst men anyway, that there's a lot of sort of toxicity around how like gay men that are more feminine are treated versus the ones that are more masculine in nature are treated. And I find that very toxic too and kind of sad, but I guess there's a lot of work to be done there as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And to break down those mindsets.
Yeah. And that's the thing is that's what I love about being able to have this conversation with you because we're both in the queer community, right?
Yes,
we're just in
different sort of rooms in that big house, I guess.
Right. Because I identify my sexuality as queer, which is very broad. So my sexuality is queer and your sexuality is also queer. But then my gender identity is also queer, whereas yours is cis. And so just the different aspects of the community.
I'm just more vanilla. Boring vanilla me, Well, listen, I don't know how much more you want to go on, but I think this has been awesome.
Yeah. Tell me.
No, I think we've covered what I like. The gender bread thing, brilliant. And I wish I'd have known that before. I'm going to go check it out on your website as well. But that is such a great way to explain it. And here, look, we've left probably a lot of things unsaid. This is how complicated, broad, how much there is to learn. So my point is, we've had a quick conversation here to get this going, but this is a never-ending conversation.
Exactly.
It's never-ending conversation. And I think it's awesome.
Yeah.
So what about the next one? So shall we announce, we already talked about that, right? On Sunday?
Yes. And actually, before we go into that, I just want to make a quick note that for anyone who is looking for more information, whether it's the genderbread specific graphic or the LGBTQ glossary terms or pretty much a longer version of what I just talked about, I have videos on my YouTube channel that the title is What's Gender? And it's a longer presentation discussing the difference between gender identity, gender expression, and sex assigned at birth. And I also have another episode that is called What's Sexuality? Awesome. And so it breaks down those terms too. So those are other resources.
I wish I had half your energy. I would be getting so much more done. But anyway, you're a lot younger than me too, so that explains some of it. No, and the other thing I wanted to say was, people go to my podcast, This Happened podcast on Instagram, and then go and link in my bio. They can listen to the 3 episodes we recorded. I actually put one out last week. There's the second part of the first conversation we had out this week. And then next week, I'm going to do the third one where we talk about you came back several months afterward and you started
with a very different voice.
Yes, a much deeper voice. When you called me on the phone, I didn't even know who it was. I'm like, Lex, really? What? Okay. And then you explained that whole thing to me too. Yeah. Anyway, but next time we're doing respecting pronouns because that's another huge, very sensitive. This is where I usually trip up and feel terrible when I need to be more aware of how to handle this, and we're going to get into that. So that's on Sunday at 2, right?
Yes. And so in addition to, it's the general topic is respect and with language. And so we will talk about the different pronouns that are there and how you use them or ways to practice pronouns or correct yourself or other people in a like friendly way, for lack of
Yes, in
better
a
term.
well-intentioned, well-meaning kind of way. Yeah, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And additionally, we will also be talking about mix, MX, which is
Yes.
like I am mix Lex Horwitz. And I get a lot of questions about how do you say mix? What does mix mean? Where did it come from? How do I explain
I
this to
had no
people?
idea what that was. I thought it was a typo when you sent it to me. Like
Exactly. So
MX,
we're
what is that? Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So
All
we're gonna
right.
talk about pronouns and like the affirmation of mix
Awesome.
in our next
Hey, this has been
episode.
great. I hope people have enjoyed it. I know it's middle of the day here on the East Coast of the US. I'm going to get back to my day job, but I look forward to Sunday, Lex. Thank you so much. This has been awesome.
Yes, it has been. I'll talk to you Sunday.
All right.
Thanks,
Bye,
Henry.
everybody. Bye.
Bye.